Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Welcome to another video. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It is super helpful. Let's talk miracles in retro gaming 2024. 5 things that are absolutely miraculous about retro gaming in 2024. How much different retro gaming is today than it was in the old days back in the 80s and 90s. So much has changed. It's absolutely amazing. So hang on. 5 quick reasons retro gaming is miraculous in 2024. Number 5, diversity. Yes, there were women and girl gamers back in the day in the arcades and on consoles, and some of them even played hardcore titles like Defender and Robotron. But it's much more diverse today. One way I know this, if you went to a retro gaming convention 20 years ago, the male to female ratio was much different than it is today. A lot more women and girls going to retro gaming cons today, percentage-wise, than there were back in the day, and just total numbers. And the cosplay and more minorities in retro gaming now than there used to be. I could just tell this, this is anecdotal on my part. I don't have a study in front of me, but as many retro gaming cons as I've gone to, as many arcades back in the day and now, believe me, there are more minorities and females involved in retro game collecting than there were years ago. And that's awesome. That's a absolute positive. Number 5, diversity. Number 4, retro gaming cons have exploded. They are everywhere. Back in the day, there were a handful. I'd go to Portland, Classic Gaming Expo, and Las Vegas, and a couple of others, as far as the bigger shows. And Classic Gaming Expo, that was the big boy back in the day, in the early 2000s. That was, it would draw maybe 1,000, 1,200 people. Let me know in the comments if you've heard of Classic Gaming Expo drawing more than that. But as far as I can recall, it was about 1,200, maybe 1,400, but it would kind of top out around there. But nowadays, retro gaming cons are much bigger. The Midwest Gaming Classic recently, this year's show, they posted that there were over 30,000 attendees. Just the fact that retro gaming has gotten so much more mainstream than it used to be is really something. Retro game collecting has gotten a lot more mainstream. Some of you may not like this. Some of you might want to like it more when, this was more of an underground hobby, and I totally understand that. And that will play into number 2, is what I'll be talking about. That will definitely relate to that, as far as many more game collectors, many more convention attendees, arcades, retro arcades popping up everywhere. Back in the day, you just didn't have this kind of mainstream acceptance of retro games. Now, in the early 80s, gaming was huge, but it was modern games. It was the current stuff people were playing. Now, there are retro arcades popping up everywhere, retro gaming stores everywhere. And yeah, you could find older games for sale, but they weren't such a focus as now. And the hobby of retro game collecting wasn't nearly as pervasive. Number 3, YouTube has had an incredible effect on retro gaming. And I'm not just talking about prices and interest and stuff like that. Back in the day, before YouTube, before online videos, could you watch a documentary on the history of the Atari 2600? Not that I know of. Maybe there was something on VHS you could watch, but nowhere near like today. Could you watch a documentary on the Fairchild Channel F, the Bally Astrocade, the ColecoVision? Absolutely not. Basically, what we had back in the day were commercials for newer games. Occasionally, you might get a little feature on something like 2020 about video games, but a lot of times it had to do with the violence in games or some parental warning or stuff. It's just incredible what you can find on YouTube. There are so many independent filmmakers making documentaries on every single console. There's the gameplay footage. There are documentaries on individual games. It's just an embarrassment of riches. If you're interested in gaming content, documentaries, shows about video games, they were so sparse and few and far between back when there were just the 3 networks and even just cable television. Yeah, there was G4 and there was some other stuff. There were some video game related program. I remember watching Starcade in the early 80s, where these contestants would pay a few minutes of each arcade game, and they would compete to who could, score the highest in just a short period of time. There was some video game stuff on TV here and there, but my goodness, with YouTube, it is just incredible. That's number 3 on my list, but you could argue that it's number 1, just how much incredible content you can consume on YouTube, both professional and amateur. Anyway, YouTube is amazing. Number 2, prices. Now, a lot of you, I understand how this can be an annoyance. Back when retro gaming collecting was underground, you could, find so many games for pennies on the dollar. And yeah, even back in the late 80s, people were starting to realize there were certain games that were more valuable than others, some more scarce than others, some rarer than others. But it wasn't like it is now, where the rare stuff goes for a ton of money, the popular stuff goes for a ton of money. And this is just amazing, because you have to realize, if you didn't live through the time, you may not know that in the late 80s and early 90s, retro video games were just considered junk. They were considered junk. They were literally thrown in the trash by a lot of people, even by people that loved video games. When they got the new system, they would put the old system up in the attic or up in the, in the closet, just up there, and to collect dust. Or they would take it to the local thrift store, or worse, just outright being thrown away. But nowadays, video games are considered collectibles, like stamps, coins, comic books, and even more so, even more importantly, they're considered valuable just as far as the unique experiences they can bring, just the simple pick up and play action, the nostalgic experiences. Retro video games were considered junk as soon as the new console would come out, the new hot console. Like the NES, for a lot of people, made the Atari 2600, 7800, the ColecoVision, the Atari 7800 came out in 86, but it was test marketed in 84, and it seemed like a dinosaur when the NES was competing with it on the shelves. It seemed old. But anyway, the NES made systems like the Intellivision, Odyssey 2, and Atari 2600, and ColecoVision. It made those just seem primitive by comparison in the eyes of a lot of retro gamers. Now, I remember I had friends that didn't like the NES. They didn't like the D-pad. They didn't like the expansive games. They just wanted to keep their simple, pick up and play maze games and shooters and things like that. But for the vast majority of gamers, the NES and then the Genesis and Super Nintendo, all the previous stuff just became junk and just worthless to so many people. Now all these old worthless games are considered collectibles, a lot of them anyway. You can still get a lot of stuff cheap, but so much of it, especially complete in the box, especially for the harder to find stuff, especially for the more popular stuff, the stuff is considered valuable. It's considered valuable in terms of financially, in terms of just sheer dollar amount. It's also considered valuable in terms of pure nostalgia or entertainment value. So yeah, number 2, prices, and the fact that retro games used to be considered junk and now they're commodities. Yeah, there's positives and negatives to that. Number 1, now this is the thing I've talked about a number of times, how I'm just blown away by Homebrews. Now, Homebrews may not seem a big deal to younger people when you're living in the age of, just countless independent games you can upload to your Switch. But if you think about the era I grew up in, the 70s and 80s, and the fact that all those systems that I watched become obsolete, all those systems that I watched, just basically go to their grave and become obsolete and irrelevant, the fact that people are still making games for those today. In the mid-90s, it started with Kevtris for the Atari 2600, a Tetris clone, and every once in a while there would be something else here and there, and then ColecoVision and all these other systems in television. There started being Homebrews for these systems that I grew up playing that I thought would be out to pasture forever. If you would have told me in 1985, 86, 87, 88, 89, that, hey, 20 years from now, there's going to be a thriving ColecoVision community. There's going to be Facebook pages. There's going to be websites. There's going to be, I would say, what? What are those? there are going to be all these forums and all these communities devoted to ColecoVision, and there was going to be brand new games for the ColecoVision. There are going to be more ColecoVision games, far more than there ever were originally. The original library of ColecoVision games, there's probably 2 or 3 times more Homebrews than there were for the ColecoVision. Now, the Intellivision, there were 125 original titles back in the day for the Intellivision, you know, when the console was in store shelves. Nowadays, with the homebrew community, many more than that all these companies and these independent programmers are producing. It's just phenomenal. And you can't truly understand, I hope I can get it across to you guys, just how remarkable it is that there's this thriving homebrew community. One small example, back in the day with my ColecoVision, there were several titles on the back of the box that were not produced, and they never came out for, you know, there were several different reasons. Part of it was because the market crashed in '83. Part of it just because individual projects got canceled. Sidetrack was supposed to be ported to the ColecoVision. It wasn't. Thanks to the modern miracle of Homebrews, boom, I've got Sidetrack, and I can get sidetracked by playing that. And I can, you know, experience that game now, this arcade port. It's a very good one on ColecoVision. Sort of fill in a missing gap for my childhood with these Homebrews. It's amazing. And, you know, you guys know how much I love ColecoVision and Intellivision, Atari 2600 and Odyssey 2 on these older systems. Just the fact that there's new games, and some of them are better than the older games. They're more sophisticated, you know, some different programming tricks. And there's so many more of them. It's just phenomenal. Now, what could have been with the Amico? That could have been a miracle, but it was just a disaster. All right, guys, what I want to hear from you, let me know in the comments, what do you consider a miracle of retro gaming in 2024? I covered diversity, gaming expos and stores exploding and being so much more popular. YouTube, just a vast, incredible number, you know, just thousands of hours of amazing footage, just documentaries and all these, just gameplay. And, you know, if you get stuck in a level, boom, just get on YouTube. Just incredible. We had very little programming, you know, on television or any, you know, just anything we could watch video game related back in the day. Next to nothing. The prices have skyrocketed, and the advent and the proliferation of homebrews. Let me know in the comments if you can think of any other miracles related to retro gaming in 2024. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking this video. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. I really, really appreciate it. We'll talk to you in another video.